Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
We will go into the screen share if my computer will allow me to do. Oh my heavens. Okay, we'll see if this works. My computer is slow this morning. Yeah. Okay. So we actually got this far. Look at that last year. So going on. By the way, the one that we just finished, the verse that we just finished, or the little section we just finished, has to do with the stubborn and rebellious son, right? Who refuses to listen to his parents, and they've tried to correct him, and he's a glutton and a drunkard. Sorry, I'm trying to think. Something Visloveya, and I can't think of the word for a second. Zolel Visloveya. Yeah, glutton and a drunkard. So, and they have to take him to the elders of the town, both the mom and the dad, and they have to tell the elders about that. There has to be proof about it, and in that case, he is actually put to death. All right. So, by the way, when you actually study this in the Talmud itself, the potential of this happening is brought down legally to almost zero. And let me give you just a little example. If he's a minor, in other words, if he's younger than 13, right, he can't be tried like this. He's a minor. If he's more than a minor and he's an adult, then he can't be tried this way either, because, so, I mean, there's like, I think it comes down to maybe a week or something like that. It just may not be a week. It may be longer than that, but it's not, it's not much time where he can be judged in this particular way from a legal standpoint. So, and this is what the Talmud is doing. And by the way, it says his mother and his father. So if both of them don't bring him, he can't be judged this way either. Both his mother and his father have to bring him. Well, ask yourself, what are the possibilities of that? So again, I think actually, and I don't think I mentioned this last year, but so many of the laws of the Torah, which are stated in such emphatic kinds of ways, are there to try and let us know what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate. And to not necessarily that they need to be implemented as written, but rather to give us a very clear guide as to what's appropriate behavior and what isn't appropriate behavior. And that's why it states it in that way. And I suppose I should say, that's not to say that there might not be a circumstance where this actually does have to be implemented. But I don't think that's the main point. The main point is to give us guidance. Yes.
Rabbi, when they say an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, an ear for an ear, you don't cut people's eyes out.
No, you don't.
You give them money. You give them money. I mean, but the Torah says you do that.
Okay.
I don't understand it.
Okay. Again, if we understand that the Torah is written in shorthand, okay, and this is something I said at the very, very beginning of this whole enterprise, is that what Rashi comes to do is to give us an introduction into rabbinic thinking. And the way the rabbis handle that eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is to understand and show that if you look through the length and breadth of the Torah, it never means that. And they give lots of examples in the Talmud of why this is not possible. What happens if a one-eyed man puts out the eye of a two-eyed man? Because it's not going to be the same. If you take out the one-eyed man's eye, then he's blind. That's not the case of the person that he blinded. That's just one example. What if the eye of the one-eyed, of the two-eyed man, his eyes are diseased, etc.? And the Talmud gives lots of examples of why the Torah doesn't mean to be taken literally as far as that's concerned. And it goes on to prove that essentially there are like maybe 5 categories of basis of compensation, right? There is pain and suffering. There's medical costs. There is loss of work time. There's all kinds of things. I can't think of all because we're not studying it right now. I can't think of all the categories. Okay, there's also the personal value of the person, because if you're injured, you can't do certain types of work for which you get paid more. So there's an incredible amount of analysis as to why. And the reason why it's eye for an eye is talking about the value of an eye for the value of an eye. Okay, so if the person's a surgeon and you put out his eye, right? Or if you break his hand so he can't perform surgery anymore, that's going to have a far greater implication than, let's say, someone who does some other kind of work that doesn't involve that manual dexterity. And the Torah puts it that way, in the sense that you want to make sure that you're acting in a just way. And the Torah speaks shorthand. And I mentioned this at the beginning, because what Rashi wants us to understand is that the Torah needs to be understood that way. And Rashi is giving us this little introduction into rabbinic thinking and how the tradition actually understands the Torah. And one reason I believe Rashi did this, I've never read it anywhere, it's pure speculation on my part, is that there were missionaries going around to Jewish people who were ignorant of the rabbinic literature, but were very respectful of the Torah, and they were using verses in the Torah to missionize. And Rashi felt that this was a desperate situation, and he did what he did to try and give people an understanding, the Jewish people at the time, to understand better their own Torah. Well, look at nowadays, right? And of course, do we have the respect for the Torah that the people of Rashi's time might have had? But I'll leave that for you to connect whatever dots you want to connect. So let's go on now. Unless you have a comment to make, just raise your hand and I'll try and pay attention. Right. And if a person has a sin, right, a transgression, mishpat mavet, which is a one deserving of the death penalty, which would involve a capital case, vehumat, and that capital verdict is carried out, and he is executed. Vehumat, he's executed. V'talita oto al eitz, and he is. You shall place him right on a tree, literally. But what it means is that the person is hanged, that he's hanged. Let's take a look at what he says here. Maybe I should go to the next verse before we go back to Rashi, just to give you a better context of what's going on and where this is really going. Lo talin nivlato al ha'etz, right? His body should not remain hanging on the tree. Ki kavor titkavarenu, but he shall indeed be buried, right? He shall certainly be buried by Yom, on the day, Hahu, on that very same day. And by the way, from that we understand that he is not to be left hanging overnight. And that's where we get, as many of you probably already know, that the idea of burial ASAP is out there in Jewish law, right? Ki kilalat Elohim talui, for one who's left hanging is a curse of God, right? And we'll understand. And translating that as curse, Rashi's going to show, isn't really the right translation. It's not a good translation. The Lord titame et amatcha, look at this, so that your land does not become defiled. Wow, right? The implications of what that kind of behavior might lead to, that the Torah uses such an expression. Hashem Elohecha, which the Lord your God, noten lecha nachala, gives to you as an inheritance. And that's why I'm saying this is about kindness. Even though this person is deceased, you don't treat his body with disrespect.
Rabbi,
Yes, Harlan.
um, when a person dies, what about the relatives that are out of state that want to come to see him at the funeral? And also, what if he wants to donate his organs? I mean, you got to wait until those relatives come. You can't bury him right away,
Right.
and then you got to wait for the organs to be donated to other people.
Yes, correct. So you're raising, of course, two implications, and that's why you need an oral Torah. Okay, the written Torah is telling us not to treat a corpse with disrespect, right? And giving us some specifics regarding that. What does the oral Torah come to do? Remember, I said the written Torah is about doing what doesn't come naturally. In other words, is there a tendency sometimes for people to treat a body disrespectfully, maybe not even knowingly, but to say to themselves, well, the person's dead. What difference does it make? And I won't forget that there were some American soldiers who were captured. Yeah, this was like in a certain country, and they dragged their bodies around the streets. I'm sorry, it's disgusting, but it's natural. So what do you have? You have the oral Torah, which is circumstances alter cases. What's the circumstance? The issue is treating the deceased respectfully, is waiting for the relatives to be able to come in from out of town to attend the funeral of this person, treating him respectfully or her respectfully. And the answer is absolutely. So what do? You wait a reasonable amount of time. If it's going to be a month, you're not going to wait a month, right? You want to try and balance things. But if it's a matter of a day or two, or maybe even 3, right, you wait, because it's a way of showing respect to the deceased. As far as donating organs are concerned, if this is the will of the person who is going to be, whose body is there and wants to donate certain organs to help others, again, is it treating the person respectfully? And the answer is yes. Now, there's certain organs where it's a little bit more of a question as to whether or not the organ can be preserved after death, like, for example, a liver, okay? And the liver is only viable for a very brief period of time. And in that particular case, even if the person is called goses, which means they're sort of in the final throes, the final stages of death, you don't take the person's liver. You don't do anything to speed up the person's leaving this life. So there are all kinds of issues that get raised by reality and applying Torah to reality. And it's so important for us, at least from a Jewish perspective, not to have the Torah simply be up in the heavens where it's a matter of, oh, what lovely ideas and what great ideals. The issue is, how do you take that Torah and put it into the ground? How do you bring it down from heaven and put it into practice? And that's why I love to say that the oral Torah is what brings the Torah down from the heavens and brings it down actually onto the earth. Oral Torah. Well, you won't find oral, well, you do actually find some oral Torah in the written Torah. Not a lot, but you do find some examples.
So, Rabbi, yes. I got my hand up, but
so it doesn't show
while
up.
We're at this, at this,
yes.
Do we assume there is a soul which has left the body?
Yes, I think we do.
So we are really at this point, the body did nothing. We are respecting the body. The gift of God is,
yes.
That
yes.
also.
Yes.
And that's, so if the body didn't do it, whatever horrible thing it was, the body didn't do it. So the body should be treated with respect.
Well, you could look at it that way, or you could say, look, you know, we also want to look at ourselves in a unified kind of way too, that we are at one with our body as long as we are alive. All right. Even though I agree with you, I tend to think that we want to look at the body as a vessel and as an extremely, extremely sacred vessel, treat it with great deal of sanctity. But I honestly, I appreciate what you said. I think it's a very interesting perspective, and I don't think I ever really thought of it like that. So thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a way of looking at this too. It's a wonderful davar acher. Let's try and get a little
Two
bit
cups of coffee. 2 cups of coffee.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good. Very good.
Right.
Let me keep going on the. Let's do a little bit of Rashi, right? It could also give you, broaden the context of our understanding here. So, v'chiyah v'ish chet mishpat mavet. So, if in a person there is a sentence of death, right? And look, Rashi tells us a very basic way in which to understand the Torah, in which we interpret Torah. He says, smichut haparshiot, the fact that this particular parsha, this little section that we're reading, that we just read, right, is smichut, is right next to the previous one, which dealt, of course, with the ben sorer umoreh, with the stubborn and rebellious son, that these two sections, which seem unrelated, are connected in the Torah. Magid, it tells you, she'im chasim alav, that were his aviv or imo, were his father or his mother, to not do what they did, right? If they are merciful, right? They don't want to do anything about it. Sof sheyetze letarbut ra'ah. In the end, he is going to act with depravity. V'ya'avor aveirot, and he is going to commit many transgressions, just transgressions, right? V'yitchayev mita b'beit din, and ultimately he will in fact be condemned to a capital sentence. So, I realize in a way it's putting tremendous responsibility on the parents, but at the same time, as I said, if he's a minor, they can't treat him this way. And if he's adult, he can't be treated this way. So it could be that the point that Rashi is really making is that if in fact, this is what's going on, and this person is behaving like this, there will be ultimately accountability. That this will be accountability. But it's also, of course, saying as parents, and again, doing what doesn't come naturally, right? Because hopefully as a parent, I realize it doesn't occur in all cases. As a parent, you want to be very loving to your child and not punish them. The truth is, of course, having to punish a child, if you really are a thoughtful person, is one of the most painful things to do. And you sometimes wonder if it hurts you more than the child who's being punished. But at any rate, regardless, there is this point about the fact that there will be accountability. But talita oto al eitz. This is a very interesting, memorable comment that Rashi is going to share with us. You shall suspend him on a tree. And where this is discussed is in the tractate Sanhedrin, which deals about the nature of trials and the nature of the sentences, etc., etc. Goes into details about these kinds of things. Rabotenu Amru, our sages said, Kol haniskalim, that anyone who is stoned, and remember, all these deaths, all these penalties are instantaneous. And I know that when one thinks of stoning, you think of people being pelted with stones. That is not the way this was carried out. In Tractate Sanhedrin, they tell you exactly how it was done, okay? And basically, initially, they would take a scarf or something like that and wind it around the person's neck, and they would pull the scarf very hard so that he would be instantly unconscious. He'd be knocked unconscious. The place where they did this was basically something like maybe 20 feet high, and like at an edge of a hill or something like that, or a valley, a gully, they would then take the person and throw him over the side of the gully, and then at that point they would take a very large stone and drop it on him. Now, I know this is not pretty stuff. I'm just telling you the idea was that it should be as instantaneous as possible. The idea was not to make a person suffer when they have to give up their life as a punishment for something they've done. Okay. Now, the point about this is that after this point, the body is then hung, it's suspended. Shene'emar, and the proof of this, it says, is ki kilalat Elohim talui, right? And this is taking this sentence and turning it around a little bit, okay? And he's understanding this as meaning one who curses God is hanged. That's the way this is understood. This is not necessarily a pshat way of understanding this, but nevertheless, it does bear this translation, and this is how they're understanding it. And so it says, V'hamavarech Hashem, and one who blesses God, and the word blesses is a euphemism for one who curses God. Beskila, the punishment elsewhere, we're told, is stoning. And so from this, the rabbis derive that anyone who is stoned is subsequently hanged, but only, as you can see, briefly. I believe that's the entire Rashi on this. I will double check. Yes, that is it. So we can then go to the next. I have a little bit of time, and so we'll go to the very next little section here. Which was the fact that the body cannot stay up for very long. And here's Rashi on this. Ki kilalat Elohim talui. Because to have someone, hanged, publicly hanged, or hanged so that the public can see it, is a curse of God. So he says, and again, I keep translating it as curse. I'm not translating it accurately. He says, zilzulo shel melech. This is a disgrace of a king. That seeing this body treated like that is a disgrace of God. She'adam asui, why? Because a human being is made bidmut, right, in the likeness, diokno, or the image of God's image, the Yisrael, and not only that, an Israelite, Haim Banav, they are considered God's sons. That's an interesting concept, right? Right. That if you are a Yisrael, you are a son, a child of God. And I think that's to actually place more responsibility. And in fact, in the book of Amos, he says to them, in the Amos, we find this verse, Banim atem lashem, you are sons of God. And the rest of that verse is that consequently, God will see to it that you have to be accountable for all your transgressions. And the truth is, in some ways, we feel more responsible and more critical of our own children that they behave well. And we feel it more deeply. In fact, I think one of the worst feelings you can ever have is to see your children behave immorally or wrongly or criminally. It's, as a parent, it is so awful, awful, awful feeling. So, goes on to say, Mashal lishnei achim, this can be compared to two brothers, to Omim, who were twins. Shahayu domin zelazeh, they were identical twins. The one looked like the other. Echad ne'esa sar, one became a prince, right? Something like that, very high up person. Ve'echad nitpas lelistiut, and one was, I'm going to say, arrested for robbery, for being a bandit. Venitla, and as a result, he was hanged. Kol haro'e oto, anyone who sees this person, Omer Hasar Talui, says, oh, the the chieftain, the prince, whatever, right, is being hanged. So he then goes on. So that's part of how Rashi wants us to, and our tradition wants us to understand. Kol klala shebimikra. He says, anytime you come across this word klala, which generally we translate obviously as curse, right? Shebimikra, which is in scripture. Lashon hakel, it has the connotation of cheapness, treating something disrespectfully. Vezilzul, right? Again, disgracefully. Something about disgrace. Up here we had it, right? Kamor, and he gives an example from Kings, first book of Kings, chapter 2. Vahu kilalani klala nimretzet. Right? So I guess given what Rashi is saying, is that this person, I think we're talking about Doeg. Okay, no, we're not. I'm trying to think. We're maybe talking about Naval, an individual called Naval who treated David very, very disrespectfully. And I think this is the reference here, right? That he treated me with an ongoing disgrace. Just let it flow. Right? So that's the Rashi for today. Yes. So we will start another chapter. I'm going to stop right here for today.
The word I had was affront
Okay.
in the JPS.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that works.
Yes, it does.
Mhm.
Again, treated disrespectfully. That's affronting. If I can make a verb out of it.
Yeah.
Gonna stop the share. Any other comments before we move on? Any thoughts, comments, etc.? Then in that case, I will stop the recording, and with God's help, we will see one another tomorrow.